Welcome back, rail fans. Again, been a longer span without a video than I would have liked, but I do have some updates, so we'll get started. First thing is a little bit of a roster update. I have a couple new locomotives added to the railroad, which is good because as we were doing our test operations, I was starting to run short of locomotives, and there's been some other things that have come up since then as well. But this is an Atlas GP38 and has, as always, a TCS wow sound decoder in it. So this one is up and running, which is excellent. I think the other locomotive I got is over in Pittsburgh, so we'll walk that way. Also, while we're walking, I put a sound decoder in the Baldwin S12 that will be ultimately the Butler yard switcher. There was an S12 in Butler around this time. I think I have written down somewhere the road number for that. So once I get to that point, I'll probably repaint that locomotive and make it match the appropriate number. The other locomotive I added is a brand new Walther's Proto GP35. This also has a TCS wow sound decoder in it. What I really need at this point is GP9s in the same paint scheme as this S12 is. So here's the S12, 9274. This is an old Athearn blue box, big surprise. I repowered it with a Masha McCann motor a long time ago, but now added in a TCS wow sound decoder. I do need to add a enclosure on the speaker because it's a tiny little speaker up in the roof of the cab, and as I suspected, it's just not loud enough without the enclosure. So so moving on, that's a bunch of locomotives to go yet. I think I've got two more Walther's B&O F7s, an A and a B unit. I've got a couple old F7As that are old Athearns in Lehigh Valley paint that I'll probably strip and paint. I've got two SD7s that are Walthers that need to be converted to SD9s. So a bunch of more locomotives just need to start putting decoders in them, and I've had some of these for a while. So it's really exciting starting to catch up with motive power. I've been adding cars all along. The other thing I've been doing really to support operations is putting in fascia pockets, for lack of a better term. So I've got pockets here for clipboards for the switch lists and pockets for throttles and pens and uncoupling skewers. My thought was, and I did this on my old railroad, my thought was just to keep the fascia free of obstructions and hooks. I'm trying to make my aisles somewhat wide, and here it's only probably 36 inches, but when we turn around here, widens out to, boy, almost 4.5 feet probably. So I'm trying to make reasonably wide aisles, but still just having like a hook or something like that for hanging a clipboard, just trying to avoid that if I can. So far what I'm trying to do is put fascia pockets for throttle and paperwork everywhere one might find themselves needing to put one or the other down. It's possible here in Butler, the yard master or the yard crew is really always going to have these two occupied. So someone coming into Butler to do work, and almost every train picks up or drops off per the actual schedule from the early 70s. So I guess they could use the ones over here at WS Tower, but we'll see. I'm going to kind of let it experience show us which way to go here. I may end up putting another set here just for road crews, so they have a place to kind of set their materials down. Obviously, until this creek scene gets filled, we've been kind of throwing things here for the time being. I do have a pocket pair here for the west end of Butler. So I've added these all the way along. Here's one in Pittsburgh staging. Ended up doing two here in Craigsville. Simply, there's only two industries here, but they're just on the opposite ends of the of town. So I did one on either side. Tried to do just one, and we had an op session, and right away that was a comment I got. Hey, we should put one over here. So trying to take the actual needs into consideration. So I think I've got a pair in Echo, one over in Moss Grove. I won't show you every single one because they're just not that interesting. But where I am now is I've got the paperwork pocket in for Dayton. I just need a throttle pocket. So the other thing I've been working on, don't know how well this will show up, to work as true automatic block signals, any turnout on the main line within the block, if it's in the reverse position, it should indicate occupancy, so that if someone leaves a turnout open, the trains coming in from either end would have the ability to understand that the block is occupied. So what I did, if I can zoom in here, you can see there's a little brass tube, and I put a piano wire and put a nice smooth arc into it, and so when the turnout is thrown, it moves that, and there is a well, we'll try and show you. Let's see what happens. Where are we? There we are. So this would swing, so it's got a real thin wire, so it's without really, doesn't create any resistance. And I put a piece of bronze tubing or brass tubing around that, and then a stud basically into the bottom of the bench work that has a feeder wired soldered to it. And then it runs through a 7,500 ohm resistor, which is somewhere. There it is, right there. So, and it actually works really well. Doesn't create any tension or extra friction on the turnout or the Caboose Industries. So it's really just tucked into the back. There's a little opening or hole on the back side of the Caboose Industries throw bar. And I use that, and it's really pretty subtle. I mean, as you can tell, I can zoom in here, and it just really isn't, you can see it, but I think it's much less obtrusive than the Caboose Industries ground throws that have the contacts in it. I tried those on my last railroad, and they're a little wonky. I mean, the Caboose Industries ground throws are very, very durable and just tremendous product, but the ones with the contacts in them, look, they're larger and they're a little cumbersome to install and adjust. So I think this is an easier and much more aesthetic. There, that's a pretty good view. And of course, I blew it, but it's a more aesthetic approach and serves the purpose. The next step, interestingly enough, that GP35 I just bought, when it runs across, even though it has a capacitor in it, its wheelbase sits on its number 8 crossover, sits on both frogs at the same time. So both trucks, and because it has a capacitor, it doesn't stop, it just has a slight hesitation. So I think I've devised a plan to use these occupancy sensors. If I wire them the right way, I can power the frog just so that it's in the reverse position, kind of power roading with that same contact. So I think I've got that figured out, but until I test it and verify it, I won't bother you with that. So I'm actually looking at a list here because I have so many things I want to update everyone on. As far as the operations go, we've started working on, again, this section of railroad from basically from Pittsburgh staging over here all the way over to Riker Yard, which actually happens to be over there, is timetable and train order, even in 1974. And in order to start kind of shaking that out, we developed what is really essentially a track warrant. And this is in Microsoft Word, so I can change it and amend it. And I think this is version like 4 already. Just trying to make it so that we can get operators to reasonably take accurate orders, and also to make it so that they're adjustable or extendable, I guess, really, which isn't prototypical, but we've been going back and forth with one of the folks who does a lot of dispatching on the railroads, other railroads I operate, and knowledgeable retired dispatcher, and we're just trying to find something that's practical but still gives you the spirit of how operating in this particular area would have worked. So you've got a number of proceed from, work between, proceed from, work between. So we can amend this or extend the track warrant, the train order, without having to just issue new ones all the time. So we're testing. I'm sure we'll amend it a few more times, but that's already been in progress. And I think so far, I mean, it's amazing how how poor I am at trying to be the dispatcher, because I just don't have any experience doing that. But the train crews, my people help me out here, have been pretty generous and tolerant of my poor quality work. But next on my list is over in Riker, which I guess I could have ordered this list a little better to keep us from walking around so much, but I forget how many I had in Riker. I think I maybe had we have the running track here, which is up on end scale ballast. You got the two mains in the back, and then we have 1, 2, 3. We might have had 3 or 4 tracks, but I've now got 2 more in, so we got 5 and 6. So ultimately there'll be 1 more track. So here, ultimately in Riker, we'll have 10 tracks, 2 mains, a runner, and 7 yard tracks. And essentially the runner is a yard track, but just has a little more flexibility. Also, I plan to have a Caboose track, which will also double as a runaround for serving the Elk Run Industries, which is on the switching lead down here. We've looked at those before, and those are all facing point moves relative to the yard switcher. So I thought the Caboose track might be, having a double-ended Caboose track would be a way they could, at the far end, they could tack a couple cars on, which would be trailing point as they're working the yard, and then they could come up the ladder and shove down the Caboose track to kick those cars out onto the runner, and then come back and run around. That way they can work those industries. There is a pair of crossovers here on the main, so that could happen there as well. Just tried to build in as much flexibility as possible, because as much planning as I do, every time I turn around there's something I wish I would have considered. So especially when we start getting into operations and some of the signaling, wow, it's well, I mean, railroads created a lot of rules, and most of the rules came from, you know, fatalities or major accidents. So I guess it's not completely surprising that it takes a while to incorporate all these things. So speaking of planning or not planning, so essentially this last turnout here is now a number 6 in code 70 to the right. It's really a crossover. And all the other crossovers I built as crossovers, put the pair of turnouts in together, and I failed to do that here. So I'm making some adjustments, and one of the adjustments already is going to be that this track, the number 7 track, is going to be a little farther away from 6 than all the other ones, and it's going to make it a little closer to the aisle. I'm not super thrilled about that, but I think the nearest rail is still is it 1 3/4 inches? Yeah, I think it's 1 3/4 inches away from the aisle. So my old railroad had them closer than that. This is closer than I wanted, but it's still better than it was. And this did kind of just go off into I don't know if it's a river or a creek, but it's a pretty large creek, if so, and it's a really long name. I'd have to go back and look to see what it is, but at some point I'll at least model the impression that you've got a bank here, but I might have some low shrubs or something just to keep a derailment from finding its way to the floor. So what next? All right, so I talked about test operations. I talked about locomotive shortages, and the other shortage I'm starting to have is a Caboose shortage, which is evidenced by, this is, I think, PW97, which is Punxsutawney to Willard, Ohio. And I've already got 2 Cabooses on this because there's more eastbound trains, which is kind of railroad north, than there are westbound, again, per the schedule that we found online, or Dave Deal found for me. So I've got such a Caboose shortage that I'm constantly, every session I have to run a double Caboose back, just so that I have enough. So I went on eBay, and I think I've purchased 4 or 5 of the essentially, this one is 3708, but Athearn or Roundhouse also made a C3000. So I think I've got I already have one that's C3000, so I've got 3 or 4 more. Maybe I think I've got one undecorated that I'll probably modify in a different manner, but and I'll renumber them. I have decals for the Cabooses, so those will get renumbered. So at least I have a fleet of a bunch of these blue bay window Cabooses, which again, by 1974, I don't think had yellow ends, which implied pool service. They were still in pool service, but they were not, for whatever reason. They had gotten away from the yellow ends. So there is so much to do to get this to be more prototypical, but in the interim, simply got to get enough going so that we can at least have a caboose and that it can work. Next item, I'm just going to keep moving through this so it's not a ridiculously long video. We talked about the dispatcher's office, and at this point in time, the door works, the door opens, there's light, there's a little bit of sheetrock. I didn't do all the sheetrock. This is actually just leftover sheetrock from the basement finishing previously. Didn't do the stuff down low because that's probably going to end up, I'm going to need all kinds of wires going in for signals and train order boards and things of that nature. But yeah, this door, much better than trying to work your way through this tiny little pole. And HVAC return, and I did make sure we have power in here for the dispatcher. Is going to have CTC panel, I think. I was thinking about using Panel Pro, but haven't decided yet because, well, like I said, there's a lot of decisions to make, and I'm trying to make them as thoughtfully as I can and without having to redo too many things. So the basically the CTC, or I think it was B&O called it TCS, but the CTC system I think is going to start at this turnout, and I'm going to have a pair of holdout signals here. Still be manual operated, but it'll be an interlocking. I may try and do that with Arduinos, and then by the time you get to the other end of Riker Yard, everything else Railroad East, which is kind of north into Buffalo and Rochester, my terminal staging yard is East Salamanca, New York. All of that will be, the main line will be double track, signaled in only one direction, which is how it was, but all of the turnouts will be controlled by the CTC panel and by tortoise switch machines probably. So the other thing, in order to prep for these test operations, I've pretty much got foam base, and when I say foam base, like it's not even glued down, it's just here, so that if anything comes off the tracks, for the most part, we're just going to fall onto the foam. So I got pretty much all of that in everywhere, so that I'm just less nervous about. I would just feel bad if something jumped off the rails and it wasn't me that was running it. Obviously, whoever was running that would not have done that intentionally. So I just tried to eliminate the chance of someone accidentally damaging my equipment, because I'm sure they'd feel bad about it. So I did that. Have a couple spots where some temporary fascia is installed, just to try and get the feel of the final arc, and then the foam will obviously get cut to fit in there. It's really actually easy. You can just press the foam on top of it and push it in a little bit, and you get a nice little arc, just the impression from the edge of the masonite, and then you just cut along that. It seems to work pretty well. So I kind of do that as a template. Same thing over here as we get into Moss Grove. Temporary fascia. What else? All right, I talked a little bit about the signals with the ABS. So this is where I had signals previously, and there's one of the samples from Integrated Signal Systems. Really, really gorgeous, well done signals, and I purchased those from ISS for all of the automatic block signal area, and they have the number plates, so I'll have to decal milepost numbers onto those for signal numbers, because if you had a number plate, then really it means the signals become ABS and are permissive as opposed to being absolute if there's no number board. So still learning the whole process of of the complicated signal system. So in the interim, though, I have added another 6 signals, and these are just super quick, cheapo, probably like $1 a piece in materials, where I whipped up just instead of being color position, it's just triple light, green, yellow, and red with a resistor at the bottom. So just a test to make sure everything works before we put the really good signals in, and also to confirm signal position and where the gaps ought to be, and that's a complicated process as well. So more signals have gone in. I guess what I ought to do is, well, let's do it. Let's turn the railroad on, and instead of telling you how cool the stuff is, you can see it yourself, and you be the judge. So turn our power on. It's fun with this GP38. Totally different sound. That's the F7 and the GP30, and there's the GP38 fired up. So yeah, so right now I've got signals all the way up to here, which is coming into Simpson Tunnel, and along with that I've started just playing around with the control points. These are not prototypical per the timetable. But we think it's going to be important because not just, I mean, this is the town of Valier, and I have a temporary name tag over there, but we think it's going to be important for the train orders to actually give you clearance to certain points. So SN is what I thought might be a good abbreviation for Simpson. And here in Dayton, we've got control points on either end. This is NP, which is short for North Point, which was actually a station in between Dayton and Valier. And then this one is PF, which is Pine Furnace. So I'm just using the timetable and kind of reinserting some of the towns I skipped as control points. No real need to do that, just figured it might, at least for my benefit, tie the history in a little tighter. So here is the, like I said, these occupancy sensing turnouts. So here we have the turnout into Franklin Glass Company. So if I throw this, we'll go look at that signal is dark right now. If I throw it, it comes on to green, which just means that this block is occupied. But to an exterior block coming in, now this block would appear to be occupied, which is good, because that way if someone leaves a turnout open, then and if you've come into a town and there's a red signal and there's no one in the town, you pretty much know probably someone left the turnout open. So I'll put it back, and it goes off. So got a bunch more of those to do, but I'm glad I figured out. I feel like I've got a plan on how to do that. And like I said, I think I might at least power some of the frogs, particularly in the crossovers as well. So the other thing I did on my old railroad, this is Carter Lumber Company, and it survived. It's one of the few buildings that'll be reused, and because I've got a 12-volt power bus underneath now, I tied the old lights in, and you can see I've got a photograph of not palletized, but racked lumber back there. You can kind of see in over the boxcar. So just tiny little thing, but I'll tell you, when you have all this progress going on in different directions, it's nice to have something simple and subtle like just the lights in on a lumber company. So before we start really, I don't want to say serious ops, but more serious ops, I really need to get my train order boards up and operational, even if they're in a temporary location, so that the dispatcher can stop trains and change orders. So one of those will be here at WS Tower. I think I'm going to use Tomar signals with servos and just have those controlled from a separate panel inside the dispatcher's office. Yeah, working with some folks out of Erie on that one. Some friends of mine up there have really good advice on how to do that. Mike Hauk has been really helpful, and he did an article that he shared with me previously about that. So I will probably use most of the way he did it, because it seems like it works pretty well. So that really is probably the key piece before operations can be really practical, or to truly see if it'll work the way we think it'll happen. So I think the last thing, believe it or not, we're down to the last item. And like I said, I should have planned this out so I could go more sequentially, but here we go back to the other room. I have been using Decoder Pro just on a programming track, which is also my track here that is my old power cab for NCE. This is also where my coupler height gauge is, and my gradation, or chart rather, for weighting cars to NMRA standards. So this is my programming track, and I just plug that into my laptop using the NCE USB adapter. But now that I have the proper command station, I shouldn't say proper, but the larger command station with more capacity, which has the USB, has the serial. I think they finally are upgrading these to USB, but originally I was going to have the programming track be track number 7 here in the yard. What I've decided to do is I think I'm going to use the Adrian Mine line, or the Elk Run branch here, as the programming track, because it's just a little easier to isolate. I don't have to isolate both ends. So I think I'm going to have a section of isolated track to here that just, when it's in programming mode, this is dead. And then from here all the way out to the end of the branch line will be the programming track. And in order to effectuate that, I've got a double throw 4-pole switch, so that, you know, in normal operation, all of this is powered just from the regular bus, but in programming track, this comes out of the programming track, and then this section will not be connected to anything, so this will be an isolated section of dead track. So that is it. It is really amazing. I have a whole string of cars that don't ever come this far south on the railroad because of their assignment, and those are all buried in the Rural Valley branch, which is this track right here. So these 2-bay these 2-bay coal cars, which will serve the mines down here in along the Rural Valley branch, this string of cars runs all the way over to Echo, just about, not quite, in order just to try and preserve space here in Riker Yard, because again, this is going to be a classification yard. This is not the end staging yard, and you can see just how full it is despite that. So I really do need the additional track. I've got one empty track here, and the Southwest Steel Special is all the way back in the main in the back. So when that one goes relatively early and is essentially a counterpart train to GB94, which is Glenwood Yard in Pittsburgh to Buffalo. So that's GB94. So these two will probably meet at Echo. So this track will be, and GB94 is a pretty long train typically, so this track will be open for GB94, but like, that's how tight it is. There's really not a lot of space here. I think Riker Yard's actually going to be bigger than it needs to be for actual operation, but as a staging yard, kind of poor. But we'll deal with that in the future, but for right now, I've got this turnout done. I'm waiting for the Plyo-Bond to glue the ties on. I've already amended the sections of rail here and actually pulled the one frog rail out, because that'll just be a direct connection from the other one, so it'll be a seamless rail there, but here I'll have a joint. Usually I do them with seamless rails all the way through, but like I said, I forgot to plan this one properly. But that is it for now. It's been a lot of fun, and it's really encouraging. I think this is going to be a really fun railroad to operate, but man, every time you go a little further, like the choose your own adventure story gets just a little more complicated every single time. So hopefully I make some good choices here. But in the meantime, we're going to keep moving forward, and it's encouraging. I think this is going to be fun. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.